Okay, I want to kick off our deep dive today thinking about a song. Just 4 lines, really. Joan Baez, Ennio Morricone, Here's to You, Nicola and Bart.
Ah, yeah. Powerful stuff.
It really is. It pops up everywhere, rallies, even video games. That agony is your triumph. It's got this incredible staying power. So the question is, what was that agony? And who were Nicola and Bart? Why does their story still hit so hard, like a century later?
Well, that line, that agony is your triumph, it really gets to the heart of the Sacco and Vanzetti affair. We're talking about Nicola Sacco, he was a shoemaker, and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, a fish peddler.
Just ordinary working guys, immigrants.
Exactly. Italian immigrant anarchists. They get arrested after a double murder, armed robbery in Braintree, Massachusetts. But this local crime, it just explodes. It becomes this huge international controversy, one of the biggest causes celebs of the whole 20th century.
And that's the core issue we're wrestling with in the sources, isn't it? Were they actually executed for murder based on solid evidence?
Or was it really about their politics? Were they targeted because they were immigrants, because they were anarchists, enemies of the state?
The sources are tough because they point in completely different directions on guilt.
They really do. The evidence itself is incredibly conflicting. But what's undeniable looking back is how this case shows this major clash. You've got working class radical ideas hitting up against this wall of xenophobia, anti-immigrant feeling, this real fear in America right after the war.
Okay, let's set that scene then. Post-World War I America. We need to understand who these guys were, politically speaking, to get why they were such targets.
Right. So working class immigrants, as we said, and they followed Luigi Galleani.
And Galleani wasn't just some abstract theorist.
No, not at all. His brand of anarchism was pretty intense. It actively called for revolutionary violence against the state, which he saw as totally illegitimate. He even published a bomb-making manual, La Salute est en vous. Health is in you.
Wow.
Yeah. So Sacco and Vanzetti, they meet at a strike back in 1917. And both of them, they refused to fight for the U.S. government. They actually fled to Mexico together to dodge the draft. They fundamentally opposed the system.
So right there, their politics basically put a huge target on their backs.
Yeah.
And the timing of their arrests, May 1920.
Couldn't be worse. It's the absolute peak of the first Red Scare.
That context is just critical, isn't it?
It's everything. You've got this rising tide of xenophobia, specifically anti-Italianism, too. And there had been those high-profile bombings in 1919, so federal agents were seriously, actively going after Galleanist groups, ruthlessly.
And there's even a connection, and a really chilling one, to probably the most infamous bombing of that period, the Wall Street bombing in 1920.
Yes. It's just 2 days after Sacco and Vanzetti get picked up. A known Galleanist, Mario Mike Buda, who was apparently very close to them.
He called them his best friends in America.
Right. Buda allegedly carries out the Wall Street bombing. And then police search a place linked to the Galleanists, and they find a manufacturer's diagram for a specific pistol, a .32 caliber Savage model 1907.
Which is the type of gun used to shoot one of the victims in the Braintree robbery they were accused of.
Exactly. It definitely puts them, worryingly close to this network of violent revolutionaries.
Okay, so let's pivot to the actual crime they were charged with. April 15th, 1920. A paymaster and his guard are robbed and killed at a shoe factory in Braintree. Sacco and Vanzetti get arrested about 3 weeks later. And, well, they didn't exactly help themselves during the arrest.
No, they really didn't. When the police stopped them, both men were armed, and they both immediately lied. Denied owning guns, denied their political connections.
Let's get specific about the guns, because the prosecution really hammered this.
Okay. Sacco had a loaded .32 Colt automatic, plus 23 .32 cartridges. And here's the key part. Some of those bullets were this obsolete type.
Obsolete, meaning old, hard to find.
Yeah, exactly. And that specific type matched an empty shell casing found right there at the murder scene in Braintree. So for the prosecution, this wasn't just, oh, he owns the right caliber gun. It was, he owns this specific, maybe rare batch of ammo used in the crime.
That does sound bad.
Huh.
And Vanzetti? What was he carrying?
Vanzetti had a loaded .38 revolver, nickel-plated. It was similar, the prosecution argued, to the gun that was missing from the guard who was killed. Plus, he had shotgun shells on him.
Okay.
And then, under questioning, he just dug himself deeper. He described his own gun incorrectly, said it was a 6-shooter when it only held 5 shots. And he claimed he bought it for way more than it was worth, like 3 times the market value.
Which just screams, I'm lying about where I got this.
Totally. So you've got armed men lying to the police, known anarchists. It was basically a perfect storm for the prosecution.
So the trial starts in Dedham, May 1921. And the atmosphere itself sounds pretty intense. Steel doors on the courtroom.
Yeah, the security was heavy duty. They were genuinely afraid of bombings or attacks. But that kind of environment, it's automatically hostile to the defense, right?
Absolutely.
Think about it. Over 600 men interviewed just to get a jury. And the heavy security, the steel doors. It meant Sacco and Vanzetti were already being framed as these potentially violent figures before the first witness even spoke.
But the real scandal, the thing that just undermines everything, is the judge, Webster Thayer. His bias seems almost cartoonish reading about it now.
Yeah.
How did he even stay on a death penalty case?
He's just jaw-dropping, isn't it? He actually asked to be assigned to the case. And his comments outside the courtroom while the trial was still going on, they're outrageous.
Like what? Give us an example.
Well, he was reportedly overheard saying things like, "I'll show them that no long-haired anarchist from California can run this court," referring to their lawyer, Fred Moore.
Unbelievable, and it didn't stop there.
No. Later on, after they were convicted, he apparently said to a lawyer acquaintance, "Did you see what I did with those anarchistic bastards the other day? I guess that will hold them for a while."
Anarchistic bastards.
Yeah.
From the judge.
Yes. His political hatred was completely out in the open. It wasn't subtle.
Okay, so with that level of bias from the judge, we absolutely have to look at all the physical evidence. The bullets, the cap, witnesses with, like, extreme skepticism.
You have to. Take the ballistics. That fatal bullet third was a .32 caliber. Prosecution experts said, yes, definitely from Sacco's pistol.
But the defense disagreed.
Right away. 2 defense experts challenged it. And more than that, one of the prosecution's own experts later signed an affidavit. He basically said, well, actually, he couldn't positively identify Sacco's gun as the only one that could have fired that bullet.
So they let tout right from their own side. What about the cap? The infamous cap?
Ah, the flop-eared cap, supposedly Sacco's. They actually forced it onto his head in court pure theater. But later, the Braintree police chief himself admitted something crucial. He said he'd actually torn the cap open when he found it. And he found it a full 30 hours after the murders.
30 hours. Lying in the street.
Exactly. The chief himself doubted it could have just sat there untouched for that long. Finding it so late and then admitting he damaged it, it really compromises that piece of evidence.
And then there's the defense strategy itself, which seems to have spectacularly backfired.
Oh, it was a disaster. Their lawyer, Fred Moore, he was a radical himself, an IWW guy. He decided to make the trial all about politics.
How so?
He basically forced Sacco and Vanzetti onto the stand to explain why they were armed and why they lied. Your explanation. They were terrified of being rounded up in anti-radical, anti-immigrant raids and deported.
Which might have been true, but
it gave the prosecution the perfect opening. They could just mock these, quote, rambling discourses on radical politics. They could hammer home the fact they dodged the draft. It shifted the focus away from the Braintree robbery specifics and let the jury judge their beliefs, their character, their politics.
So the conviction comes down, but the fight goes on for years. Appeals, motions, and then comes this huge potential breakthrough in 1925, the Maderos confession.
Right, Celestino Maderos. He's an ex-con already sentenced for another murder, and he confesses. Says he was involved in the Braintree crime, and Sacco and Vanzetti absolutely were not.
That's enormous. Did he name names?
Yes. His confession led to this whole alternative theory involving the Morelli gang. And apparently the leader of that gang, Joe Morelli, actually looked quite a bit like Sacco.
Okay, so new suspect, confession clearing them. That has to mean a new trial, surely.
You would think. But Judge Thayer hears the motion and denies it, flat out.
How did he justify that?
He basically dismissed it all. Famously, he said the defense was suffering from a new type of disease, implying they were just grasping at straws. He refused to consider anything that challenged that original guilty verdict.
So frustrating. Now, this is where modern science should have stepped in, right? 1927, Major Calvin Goddard, comparison microscope, brand new tech. This should settle the bullet question.
It should have. Goddard examined the evidence, bullet the third, the shell casing, Sacco's Colt, and his conclusion.
What did he find?
He concluded, yes, the fatal bullet in that specific casing were fired from Sacco's pistol. And later tests, 1935, 1961, even 1983, with better tech, they all seem to reconfirm Goddard's findings.
Okay, so multiple tests over decades confirming the match. That sounds pretty conclusive. How do historians argue against that? Isn't questioning the chain of custody just trying to muddy the waters?
Normally, maybe. But in this case, given everything else, the known bias, the documented issues with how evidence was handled during the trial, and the chaotic appeals.
You mean we can't be sure Goddard or the later guys were even looking at the original uncontaminated evidence?
That's the core problem. Historians don't doubt the microscope technology itself. They doubt the provenance of the specific bullet and casing examined. There were so many opportunities and, frankly, potential motives for evidence substitution or tampering during those years of appeals. The physical evidence trail is historically contaminated, which forces you back towards the bias and the political context.
Right. And beyond the courtroom drama, this case just lit a fire internationally. The intellectual outcry was huge.
It was unprecedented, really. You had Harvard law professor Felix Frankfurter writing this scathing article in The Atlantic saying Thayer's decision was honeycombed with demonstrable errors.
And support came from everywhere.
All over the world. Big names like Albert Einstein, George Bernard Shaw pleading for them. Even, ironically, Benito Mussolini in Italy.
Mussolini? Really?
Yeah, apparently he quietly used diplomatic channels to try and get them released. Not out of any love for anarchists, obviously, but mostly because the case was generating so much anti-Italian feeling globally. He wanted to quell that.
Wow. Okay, but then, years later, we get these bombshells that seem to point back towards guilt. That's the real historical whiplash here.
It really is. It complicates any simple narrative of pure innocence. In 1941, Carlo Tresca, who was a major anarchist leader himself, someone who knew them,
What did you say?
he stated quite clearly, Sacco was guilty, but Vanzetti was innocent. Meaning innocent of the actual shooting, implying Sacco pulled the trigger or was at least directly involved in the murder. Maybe Vanzetti wasn't.
Okay, that's one thing. But then the revelation about their own lawyer.
Yeah, Fred Moore, the radical lawyer who handled their defense. Decades later, a letter from the novelist Upton Sinclair comes to light. Sinclair wrote a famous novel, Boston, about the case.
And in the letter.
Sinclair reveals that Moore himself told him, confessed to him, that Sacco and Vanzetti were guilty as charged, and that he, Moore, had fabricated their alibis for the trial.
Their own lawyer said they did it, and he made up the alibis.
That's what Sinclair wrote Moore told him. Now, Sinclair himself added that he wasn't sure if Moore was entirely trustworthy, but still. It's incredibly damaging information coming from their own defense attorney. It leaves us with this deeply uncomfortable contradiction. The world rallied to save men who might well have committed the crime they were accused of, even while they were undeniably victims of a deeply prejudiced legal process.
That ambiguity makes their final moments even more powerful, maybe.
Yeah.
Vanzetti's speech at sentencing in April 1927 is incredible.
It's truly one of the great political statements of the century. He stands there facing death and says, look, I didn't commit this crime, this murder, but the things I am guilty of, the things I'm suffering for.
What did he say he was guilty of?
He said, I am suffering because I am a radical, and indeed I am a radical. I have suffered because I am an Italian, and indeed I am an Italian. He owned his identity, his beliefs, and then he flips the script entirely on the state.
That's the triumph part?
Exactly. He declares, now we are not a failure. This is our career and our triumph. That agony is our triumph. He framed their impending execution not as defeat, but as the ultimate exposure of the system's injustice.
And that agony became reality. They were executed, electric chair, just after midnight, August 23rd, 1927.
The reaction was immediate and massive. Huge protests erupted worldwide. Wildcat strikes shut down factories in South America.
And the anger didn't just fade away.
No. It festered. Years later, in 1932, Judge Thayer's house was bombed. It caused huge damage, thankfully didn't kill anyone, but it showed the toxic, long-lasting impact of the case.
And culturally, that agony really did become their triumph. We started with the Joan Baez song.
Which absolutely cemented Vanzetti's words as this kind of universal anthem for underdogs for freedom.
But it wasn't just Baez.
No, Woody Guthrie did a whole album, Ballads of Sacco and Vanzetti, years after the fact. And like you said, the Baez song turning up in something like the Metal Gear Solid video games, it keeps their story, their martyrdom, alive for completely new generations who might never encounter it otherwise.
So, culturally immortal. But did anything change legally? Did this massive, obvious injustice actually lead to reforms in Massachusetts law?
Yes, thankfully it did. The whole appeals process, Thayer blocking everything, it really highlighted serious flaws in the state's judicial system.
So what changed?
Well, in 1939, they finally gave the state's Supreme Judicial Court the power to review the entire trial record in capital cases, death penalty cases. And crucially, the power to order a new trial if they felt justice demanded it, regardless of procedural technicalities.
A direct result of the Sacco and Vanzetti case.
Directly motivated by it. It was a recognition that the system had failed badly and needed a safety valve.
Which brings us almost full circle to 1977, the 50th anniversary of the executions. Governor Michael Dukakis makes a pretty significant proclamation.
He does. He formally states that Sacco and Vanzetti had been unfairly tried and convicted. And he declared that any disgrace should be forever removed from their names.
But he didn't pardon them, right? That's an important distinction.
Crucial distinction. A pardon would imply they were guilty, but were being forgiven. Dukakis specifically avoided that. His proclamation was about condemning the unfairness of the trial itself, exonerating them from that judicial disgrace, not necessarily declaring them innocent of the underlying crime.
So this whole deep dive really boils down to how prejudice, anti-immigrant, anti-radical can completely warp the legal system. These two men, Galleonist anarchists, became these global symbols, martyrs against the backdrop of 1920s American fear.
It's the ultimate tragic example. As one historian put it, the case showed that who you are and what you believe has an enormous amount to do with how you're treated by the judicial system. And that larger prejudice, sadly, remains an issue.
Which brings us back to Vanzetti. That agony is our triumph.
Yeah. And maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is this. What does it actually mean for a justice system when the state executes someone and the person being executed frames that very act as their greatest victory in exposing the system's flaws? Is the promise of justice still conditional even now based on who you are and what you believe?
That's a heavy question to end on. And if you really want to get a feel for the human side of this, beyond the politics and the evidence debates, I'd urge you to seek out the letters. Sacco and Vanzetti wrote incredibly moving letters from prison. Even the famous journalist Walter Lippmann read them back then and said, you know, by every measure he used to judge character, these felt like letters written by innocent men. Makes you think.